my true Nigerian name, or the true Nigerian pronunciation, or as close as I can get to it, is Bola Sade, which means crowning glory. And
She walks into a police station in Jamaica on a quiet morning in 2005, not as a suspect, but as a mother whose daughter is about to be charged. By the time Sade Adu leaves that building, she will face arrest herself. The woman whose voice once defined elegance, whose face moved millions of records by selling untouchable mystery, will be handcuffed and photographed in a way that feels impossible to reconcile with the image. But here is what almost nobody understood then, and what most still don't understand now. This was not the moment Sade's life broke. It was the moment the escape plan she'd been executing for years finally collided with the one thing she could not control: the cost of protecting someone she loved more than the stage. The story you think you know about Sade is incomplete. You know the voice, you know the songs, you know she disappeared. What you probably don't know is why that disappearance wasn't retreat, it was survival. And the price she paid to hold on to herself was measured not in album sales or concert revenue, but in courtrooms, custody battles, and the brutal choice between fame and the people who needed her when the cameras went dark. This is not a story about a star who burned out. This is about a woman who understood, earlier than most, that fame is a contract written in someone else's ink. And when she finally read the terms clearly, she did something almost no one at her level ever does. She said no. But refusal in the music industry doesn't come cheap, and the bill was about to come due in ways she never anticipated. Helen Sade Adu did not grow up dreaming of stadiums. She grew up split between two countries, two parents, two versions of what safety might look like. Born in Nigeria to a Nigerian father and an English mother, her childhood fractured early when her parents divorced. By the time she was 4, she was back in England with her mother, raised in a working-class town where she learned quickly that standing out meant being vulnerable. That lesson, blend in, stay quiet, protect yourself by not asking for too much, would become the architecture of her entire adult persona. Not by accident, by design. She studied fashion, not music. She wanted to make clothes, not records. When she started singing with a band in London called Pride, it was almost incidental, a side project, a way to fill time while she figured out what came next. But the industry saw something in her that she had not yet named. They saw mystery where she felt only privacy. They saw cool detachment where she experienced self-protection. And they turned that misunderstanding into millions. By 1984, her band, now renamed Sade, released Diamond Life. The album moved like smoke through the charts. Smooth Operator became a standard before most people even knew her full name. She was elegant, unreadable, controlled. The press called her enigmatic. What they meant was she wouldn't play the game. She wouldn't flirt with the camera. She wouldn't pretend intimacy with strangers. And in the mid-'80s, when every other female artist was expected to perform availability, Sade's refusal felt radical. But it wasn't rebellion. It was boundary setting born from something much older. She had learned young that love could leave, that men could walk away, that family could dissolve. So she built a life where she controlled the distance, where no one could get close enough to hurt her unless she allowed it. The stage was perfect for that. You can move millions without letting anyone touch you. Here is the pattern most people miss. Sade did not hate fame because it was loud. She hated it because it demanded the one thing she had spent her entire life refusing to give: access. The industry wanted her face, her time, her presence at events that meant nothing, her cooperation with journalists who wanted to turn her life into copy. And every time she said no, they called her difficult. But she was not difficult, she was deliberate. By the late 80s, she was one of the biggest stars on the planet. Promise sold over 4 million copies. She could fill arenas without trying, but between albums, she would disappear. Not to rehab, not to scandal, just gone. Back to London, back to privacy, back to a version of herself that didn't require performance. The industry hated it. Managers, label executives, publicists, they all wanted more. More tours, more press, more albums on a tighter cycle. They had a product, and the product was her face, her voice, her willingness to show up at events that meant nothing, her cooperation with journalists who wanted to turn her life into copy. And every time she said no, they called her difficult. But she was not difficult, she was deliberate. In her mind, she had always been executing a staggered escape plan, a plan that would allow her to protect herself from the brutal transaction of being a public figure. She had bought her freedom with one more album, one more successful tour. But the freedom was always contingent on one thing, being unneeded. In 1989, she married Carlos Scola Pliego, a Spanish film director. It looked from the outside like the kind of union that made sense. Two artists, two people who valued privacy, two lives that, in theory, could coexist outside the machinery of celebrity. It did not coexist. By several accounts, the marriage was troubled almost from the start. Sade wanted stability. She wanted a home that felt like shelter, not spotlight. But Carlos, according to friends, struggled with her fame in ways neither of them anticipated. He was not interested in being Mr. Sade, but the world was not interested in seeing him anything else. The power imbalance was structural, not personal, and it corroded the relationship slowly, invisibly, until what remained was resentment on both sides. They divorced in 1995, quietly, no public statements, no tabloid wars, just another ending Sade refused to turn into content. But here's what the divorce cost her that no one saw. It reinforced the lesson she had learned as a child, that intimacy was conditional, that people leave, that the only safety was in self-reliance. She would not make the mistake again of believing another person could be home. After the divorce, Sade did something the industry found unforgivable. She stopped caring about the timeline. Love Deluxe came out in 1992. The next album, Lovers Rock, wouldn't arrive until 2000. 8 years, an eternity in pop music. Her label was furious, her team was confused, but Sade had a daughter now, Isla, and a new partner, a Jamaican music producer named Bob Morgan, and she had made a choice that almost no woman at her level ever makes cleanly. The child comes first. Not the tour, not the deadline, not the brand. The child. She moved to the Caribbean. She lived quietly. She raised Isla away from cameras, away from London, away from the grind. For a while it worked. She was still Sade the artist when she needed to be, but the rest of the time she was just a mother. And that distinction mattered to her more than the industry could comprehend. But privacy, it turns out, does not guarantee peace. And the life she built in the Caribbean, the one that felt like freedom, was about to become the site of the most public humiliation she would ever endure. By the early 2000s, Isla was a teenager, and like many teenagers raised between cultures, between a famous mother and a quieter life, she was trying to figure out who she was. She had begun identifying as transgender, a journey Sade supported fully, even as it complicated their already complex existence. Then, in 2005, everything detonated. Isla, then still called Michaelia, was arrested in Jamaica after an altercation. The details vary depending on the source. What is documented is this. Sade, upon learning her child had been detained, went to the police station. She demanded to see Isla. She was told to wait. She refused. And in that refusal, in that insistence that a mother's right to protect her child superseded bureaucratic procedure, she was arrested herself. The photos that followed were brutal, not because they were explicit, but because they shattered the image. Here was the woman who had spent 20 years controlling every frame, every interview, every public moment, now photographed in handcuffs, powerless, humiliated. The tabloids had a field day, but here's what they missed. This was not a scandal. This was love. This was a mother who had walked away from fame specifically so she could be present for moments like this. And when the moment came, when her child needed her, she showed up. She did not call a lawyer first. She did not protect the brand. She protected the person. The charges were eventually dropped. Sade paid whatever needed to be paid. She and Isla left Jamaica and returned to England. But the arrest, the exposure, the invasion, it confirmed everything Sade had always believed about fame, that it consumes, that it distorts, that it takes the most private pain and turns it into performance. She would not give it any more than she already had. Soldier of Love came out in 2010, 10 years after Lover's Rock. The industry had long since written her off as commercially irrelevant. And then, the album debuted at #1 in 14 countries. It sold over 2 million copies. It proved that you could disappear and still matter. That mystery, real mystery, was more powerful than overexposure. But Sade did not tour the way other artists tour. She did a short run, controlled environments, no chaos, and then she was gone again. Because here is the thing almost nobody wants to say out loud. Sade won. Not in the way the industry measures winning. She did not maximize profit. She did not build an empire. She did not become a brand. But she kept herself. She raised her child. She made music on her terms. And when the machine tried to take more than she was willing to give, she walked away. That is not failure. That is refusal. And refusal at that level is rare enough to be revolutionary. The years after Soldier of Love were quiet again. Sade largely stayed out of the public eye. Isla transitioned, and Sade supported that journey with the same fierce privacy she had always maintained. In interviews, rare, careful, she spoke about Isla with pride. She did not make it a publicity moment. She did not turn her child's identity into content. She just loved him. Publicly, yes, but on her terms. By the time the 2020s arrived, Sade had become something unusual in pop culture, a legend who had not destroyed herself. She had not collapsed into addiction, bankruptcy, or bitterness. She had not married 5 more times looking for the stability she couldn't find in herself. She had simply lived, quietly, deliberately, with the people she chose. The world occasionally asks when the next album is coming. She does not answer, because the question misunderstands what she learned decades ago, that fame is not a career, it is a disease, and the only cure is distance. Go back now to that police station in Jamaica, to the moment Sade was handcuffed. The tabloids saw scandal, the industry saw damage control, but if you look closely, you see something else. You see a woman who had spent 20 years learning how to say no to the world's demands, finally saying yes to the one demand that mattered, her child's need for a mother who would show up, even when it cost her the image she had spent decades protecting. That arrest was not the breaking point. It was proof the escape had worked. Because the woman who got handcuffed that day was not Sade the icon. She was Helen, a mother. A person who had chosen love over legend. And she paid for that choice the same way she paid for every other refusal. In headlines, in judgment, in the industry's quiet fury that she would not cooperate with her own consumption. But she survived. And survival, for someone like Sade, was never about the applause. It was about walking away before the stage became a cage. The bitterness was not hers. It belonged to the people who could not understand why someone would choose silence over fame, privacy over profit, a child over a brand. They called it a mystery. She called it a life. And when the music comes back, if it comes back, it will be because she decided, not because the industry demanded, not because the algorithm required content, because she, after all these years, after all the exits and refusals and quiet rebellions, finally felt like singing again. That is not escape. That is freedom. And it cost everything the world told her she was supposed to want.